In the 20th century, global power was shaped not only by presidents, elections, or public debates. Much of it was shaped quietly by a small group of unelected statesmen, bankers, diplomats, and strategists who moved between Wall Street, Washington, and the highest levels of foreign policy. Walter Isaacson and Thomas Evans called them the wise men. They were not a formal council, they were not a conspiracy. They were something more subtle, a governing class, professional managers of American power, who helped design the post-war world order. They believed that history had given the United States a responsibility to lead, to contain rivals, to prevent chaos, to structure global order. But they also helped build institutions and assumptions that would dominate world politics for decades. In this video, I want to introduce the 6 central figures of the wise men: Dean Acheson, George Kennan, John J. McCloy, Robert Lovett, Averell Harriman, Charles Chip Bolin, and I want to ask a simple question. Who were these men, and what kind of world did they build? The phrase wise men refers to a generation of elite American officials who came of age during World War II, the early Cold War, the creation of NATO, and the rise of the national security state. They were not mass politicians. They were not ideological radicals. They were establishment managers, men of law, banking, diplomacy, and administration. They believed the stakes after 1945 were absolute, that the world would either be structured by American leadership or destabilized by Soviet expansion and ideological conflict. They operated in a permanent emergency, a world where decisions could not always wait for democratic deliberation. They saw themselves as guardians of stability, but stability came through institutions, alliances, security doctrines, permanent structures of management. And once those structures exist, they tend to outlast the people who build them. So let's meet them, one by one, these wise men. Dean Acheson, the architect of American leadership. Dean Acheson served as Secretary of State under Harry Truman, and more than anyone else, he helped define the post-war doctrine of American global responsibility. Acheson believed that the United States could not retreat into isolation. Power vacuums, in his view, created instability, and instability invited conflict. He became one of the key architects of the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, NATO. These were not simply policies, they were architecture. Acheson helped build the idea that American power was not temporary. It was structural, a permanent pillar of world order. He had a lawyer's confidence in clear lines: allies versus enemies, order versus chaos, leadership versus collapse. Acheson represents the moment when American foreign policy stops thinking in terms of wars and begins thinking in terms of systems. George Kennan, the strategist of containment. If Acheson was the architect, George Kennan was the theorist. Kennan is famous for the doctrine of containment, the idea that Soviet power should be contained through long-term strategic pressure, not necessarily through immediate war, but through sustained geopolitical discipline. Kennan was cautious, reflective, and often skeptical of public moral crusades. He disliked ideological theater. He preferred quiet realism. But Kennan was still committed to a world where the United States retained primacy. He believed in spheres of influence. He believed that global strategy depended on balance managed from the center, and he was unusually frank in private about the reality of American advantage. That policy often aimed to preserve it. Keenan represents the managerial intelligence of empire, not emotional, not theatrical, but structural. John J. McCloy, the revolving door statesman. John J. McCloy may be the most emblematic wise man of all, because he moved seamlessly between Wall Street law, wartime administration, Cold War diplomacy, and corporate leadership. McCloy served in government, but he also embodied the revolving door between finance and state power. He became deeply involved in the reconstruction of Germany and Japan. He played a role in shaping the post-war settlement, and he helped institutionalize the idea that American leadership was not only military, but economic and administrative. McCloy represents continuity, power that survives elections because it is embedded in institutions. Robert Lovett, the quiet man of defense planning. Robert Lovett is less famous to the public, but enormously important. He served as Assistant Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense, a key architect of Pentagon expansion. Lovett was a managerial figure, not a charismatic leader, but a planner of permanent systems. Under men like Lovett, defense became not only a wartime activity, but a continuous institution. The Cold War required preparedness without end, and preparedness required bureaucracy. Lovett helped build that world, a world where security becomes a permanent administrative condition. Averell Harriman, wealth and diplomacy fused. Averell Harriman was a different type of wise man. He came from immense wealth. He was both an industrialist and a diplomat. He served as an ambassador, an advisor, a negotiator. Harriman represents the fusion of business interest, elite diplomacy, geopolitical strategy. He moved through the highest circles of American and European power. To Harriman, the world was a chessboard of industrial capacity, alliances, and influence. He was not merely an official. He was a representative of elite continuity. Charles Chip Bolin, the interpreter of the Soviet enemy. Charles Bolin was the Soviet specialist. He served as translator, diplomat, and interpreter of the rival empire. He understood Russia in ways most American politicians did not. Bolin's role was crucial because Cold War strategy depended not only on force, but on interpretation, on understanding what the enemy feared, what they wanted, what they might do. Bolin represents the intellectual, managerial side of rivalry, the empire of analysis. What did they build? When we step back, what did these wise men create? They helped build NATO, the National Security Council system, the Doctrine of Containment, the architecture of American global leadership, the permanent defense bureaucracy. They professionalized power. They made foreign policy into management. They believed they were saving the world from chaos, and perhaps, in their minds, they were. But in doing so, they created a structure where global order became something administered, not negotiated. Leadership became permanent, emergency became normal. The wise men are fascinating because they were not cartoon villains. They were intelligent, serious, and often well-intentioned. but they helped create a world where freedom and order increasingly depended on administration from above. They remind us that modern power does not always arrive through tyranny. It often arrives through management. And the institutions built in crisis often outlive the crisis itself. In a video coming soon, we'll look at how thinkers like Noam Chomsky critique the doctrine these men helped build, and what it means for the modern world. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe if you're interested in more entertaining, original material.